The smell of burning bread is something you never forget, not the pleasant aroma of fresh loaves cooling on racks, but the acrid, choking stench of flour and wood and dreams turning to ash. That smell filled the streets of Little Italy on the night of August 3rd, 1920, as flames consumed Romano's bakery on Mulberry Street, and with it, everything Maria Romano had built with her own hands over 15 years. 10-year-old Vincent Romano stood across the street, held back by neighbors, as he watched his mother run into the burning building one last time, screaming that the week's receipts were still inside, that without that money, they'd have nothing. He watched the roof collapse, watched the flames shoot higher, watched the firefighters arrive too late, moving too slow, like they didn't really care if an Italian woman's bakery burned to the ground. But what Vincent didn't know, as his mother's body was carried out of the smoking ruins and his entire world collapsed into ash and grief, was that 30 years later he would stand on this same street corner, not as a grieving child, but as Don Vincenzo Romano, boss of the most powerful crime family in New York. And he wouldn't be alone. He'd have 400 men at his back, all of them waiting for a single word from him. And that word would bring justice. Not the kind you find in courtrooms or police stations, the kind that burns just as hot as the fire that took his mother, the kind that 30 years of patience and power and cold rage can build. Because in the world Vincent was about to enter, debts were always paid. Always, no matter how long it took. Maria Romano had been 19 years old when she arrived at Ellis Island in 1905, alone, except for a small leather bag containing everything she owned. Her husband, Giuseppe, had come to America 6 months earlier to find work, promising to send for her once he'd saved enough money. He'd died in a construction accident 3 weeks after she arrived, leaving Maria pregnant and alone in a country where she barely spoke the language. She could have gone back to Italy, could have returned to her village in Sicily and lived with family, raising her son in poverty, but at least surrounded by people who knew her name. But Maria was stubborn. Giuseppe had died building this city. She'd be damned if she'd let that sacrifice mean nothing. She'd learned to bake from her grandmother in Sicily. Bread was something she understood, flour and water and yeast and time, simple ingredients that could become something beautiful if you treated them right. So she found work in a bakery on Mulberry Street, spending 16-hour days kneading dough, while her belly grew with Giuseppe's child. Vincent was born in the small room behind that bakery in January 1906. Maria worked until the day her water broke, then was back behind the counter 3 days later with Vincent strapped to her chest. The bakery owner, an old Sicilian named Tommaso, had been kind. He'd taught her his recipes, let her bring Vincent to work, even helped her save money. When Tommaso died in 1910, he'd left the bakery to Maria in his will. No children of his own, he'd written. Maria was like a daughter to him. She deserved it. Romano's bakery had become Maria's entire life. She made the best bread in Little Italy, crusty Italian loaves, soft focaccia, sweet rolls that dissolved on your tongue. Her prices were fair. She extended credit to families going through hard times. She gave day-old bread to the poor for free. The neighborhood loved her. Vincent grew up in that bakery. His earliest memories were of flour dust dancing in morning sunlight, of his mother's hands kneading dough with a rhythm like a heartbeat, of the warmth of the ovens on cold winter mornings. She'd taught him to bake as soon as he was tall enough to reach the counter, taught him her recipes, her techniques, the secrets of perfect bread. "This is our legacy," she'd told him 1,000 times. "Your father built bridges and buildings. We build something people need every single day. There's honor in that, Vincent. Remember that." Vincent remembered. He remembered everything about those years. The good years, before the fire, before everything burned. The trouble started in 1919. 3 brothers named Moretti opened a bakery 2 blocks away. They weren't bakers. They were businessmen who'd made money during the war and were looking to expand. They hired real bakers to do the work while they handled business operations. Their prices were lower than Maria's, not because their bread was cheaper to make, but because they could afford to take losses while building market share. They offered free delivery. They stayed open later. They advertised in the Italian-language newspapers. Within 6 months, Maria's business had dropped by half. Families who'd bought from her for years started going to Moretti's because they couldn't afford to be loyal when money was tight. Maria understood. She didn't blame them, but understanding didn't pay the bills. She tried to compete, extended her hours, lowered her prices, even tried offering delivery. But she was one woman with a 10-year-old son to raise. The Morettis were 3 brothers with money and connections. It wasn't a fair fight. By summer 1920, Maria was 3 months behind on rent. The landlord, also Italian, had been patient, but he had his own bills to pay. He gave Maria until the end of August. Pay up or get out. Vincent remembered the night his mother sat him down and explained they might lose the bakery. He'd seen her cry for the first time since his father's funeral. "I'm sorry, Vincent. I tried so hard. But sometimes trying isn't enough." "We could ask the Morettis for a loan," Vincent had suggested, not understanding yet how the world worked. Maria's face had hardened. "Never. We don't beg from people who are trying to destroy us." 2 weeks before the rent was due, one of the Moretti brothers, Carlo the eldest, had visited the bakery. Vincent remembered him clearly. Expensive suit, slicked back hair, smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Romano, I have a proposition for you," Carlo had said, sitting at one of the small tables like he owned the place. "My brothers and I would like to buy your bakery. We'll pay off your debts and give you enough to start fresh somewhere else. Everyone wins." "This bakery isn't for sale," Maria had said quietly. "Be reasonable, you're drowning. We're throwing you a rope. You pushed me in the water. Now you want to be the hero who saves me?" Maria's voice had been steady but cold. "Get out of my bakery." Carlo's smile had disappeared. "You're making a mistake, Mrs. Romano. A big one. The only mistake I made was being too kind to notice what you were doing until it was too late. Now get out before I get my husband's old shotgun from upstairs." Carlo had left, but Vincent remembered the look on his face. Not anger, something colder, more calculated. 3 days later, Romano's bakery burned to the ground. The fire started around midnight on August 3rd, 1920. Vincent and his mother lived in the apartment above the bakery, 2 small rooms that smelled perpetually of yeast and cinnamon. Vincent woke to the smell of smoke, and his mother shaking him urgently. "Fire! Vincent, get up! We have to get out!" The stairs were already filled with smoke. Maria wrapped Vincent in a wet blanket and carried him down, both of them coughing and choking. They made it to the street just as the front windows exploded from the heat. Neighbors were gathering, some forming bucket brigades, others just watching. Vincent stood there in his nightshirt, clutching his mother's hand, watching their entire life burn. That's when Maria remembered the cash box. She kept the week's receipts in a metal box under the counter, nearly $200, enough to pay part of what she owed the landlord. Enough to maybe buy a little more time. "Stay here," she told Vincent, pressing him into the arms of Mrs. Chen from the laundry next door. "Don't move, I'll be right back." "Mama, no!" But Maria was already running back into the building. Vincent screamed, fought against Mrs. Chen's grip, watched the doorway his mother had disappeared into. Seconds passed, then a minute. Then the roof collapsed with a sound like the world ending. The firefighters finally arrived, but they moved slowly, took their time setting up their equipment. One of them actually stopped to light a cigarette before turning on the hoses. Vincent would remember that for the rest of his life. The casual indifference. Like an Italian woman's life didn't matter enough to hurry. They pulled Maria's body out an hour later. The metal cash box was still clutched in her burned hands. Empty. Someone had already taken the money, probably whoever set the fire. The fire inspector ruled it accidental, probably faulty wiring. No investigation, no questions about why 3 men had been seen running from the building just before the flames started. No interest in the fact that the Morettis had tried to buy the bakery 3 days earlier. Maria Romano was buried in a pauper's grave. Vincent, now an orphan with no family in America, was sent to a Catholic orphanage in Brooklyn. The burned-out shell of Romano's bakery was sold for back taxes. 3 months later, the Morettis bought the property and rebuilt it as an expansion of their own bakery. Justice, Italian widow style, the kind you got when you had no money, no connections, no power. But Vincent Romano was only 10 years old. He had time, and 30 years, he would learn, was exactly long enough to build the kind of power that could burn the world. The orphanage was brutal, overcrowded, underfunded, run by nuns who saw discipline as a holy virtue and mercy as a weakness. Vincent learned to fight, to steal food when the portions were too small, to hide his emotions behind a wall of cold silence. He learned other things too. The orphanage was full of Italian boys, sons of immigrants who died in factory accidents or succumbed to disease. Boys who knew the streets, who had older brothers in gangs, who whispered about the real power in Little Italy. Not the police or politicians, but the men who ran the neighborhoods through fear and loyalty. The Black Hand, they called it then. The old mafia families who'd brought the traditions of Sicily to America. Protection rackets, gambling, bootlegging once prohibition started, violence when necessary, but always calculated, always purposeful. Vincent listened and learned. He understood something the other boys didn't, that anger without power was just noise. But anger with patience, with planning, with the right connections, that could move mountains or burn them down. When he was 14, Vincent left the orphanage, just walked out one day and never went back. He found his way to Little Italy and started working for a crew run by a man named Salvatore Luciano. Lucky Luciano, they'd later call him, one of the most powerful mobsters in American history. Vincent started as a runner, delivering messages and packages. He was smart, reliable, never asked questions. Luciano noticed. By the time Vincent was 16, he was collecting protection money. By 18, he was running his own crew. By 21, he'd killed his first man, a rival mobster who'd tried to muscle in on Luciano's territory. Vincent discovered he was good at violence, not because he enjoyed it, but because he could turn off his emotions completely when necessary, could look a man in the eyes and pull the trigger without hesitation, could make decisions that would haunt other men's dreams but left him sleeping soundly. Luciano saw potential. "You got ice in your veins, kid. That's rare. Most guys, they're all fire and rage. Burns hot but burns out fast. You're patient. That's more dangerous." Through his 20s and 30s, Vincent rose through the ranks. He survived the Castellamarese War, made the right alliances, showed loyalty when it mattered, and ruthlessness when it didn't. By 1945, he was a capo running significant operations in Manhattan. By 1948, he was officially recognized as a boss, controlling his own family. He married a nice Italian girl who asked no questions about his work and gave him 3 sons. He bought a house in the suburbs, went to church on Sundays, donated to Catholic charities. From the outside, he looked like a successful businessman. Import-export, the tax form said, but Vincent Romano never forgot what he really was. The son of a widow who'd been burned alive by greedy men who faced no consequences. And he never forgot the Moretti brothers. He'd kept track of them over the years. Carlo, the eldest, now ran a successful chain of bakeries across the city. His brothers, Angelo and Dominic, had invested in real estate and restaurants. They were wealthy, respectable, members of the Chamber of Commerce, pillars of the community. None of them had ever been charged with arson or murder. Maria Romano's death remained officially accidental. Justice had never touched them. But Vincent had been patient, building power, building connections, waiting for the right moment. And in August 1950, exactly 30 years after his mother died, that moment finally came. Vincent stood outside what used to be Romano's bakery on Mulberry Street. The building looked different now, expanded, renovated, with big glass windows and a sign that read, Moretti and Sons Bakery. Inside, he could see modern ovens, gleaming counters, the kind of professional operation his mother could never have afforded. Behind Vincent, filling the entire street, were 400 men, soldiers from every crew in his family, plus representatives from allied families who owed him favors. They stood silent, waiting. Cars lined both sides of the street for 3 blocks, engines running. Everyone knew why they were there. Carlo Moretti was 70 years old now. His brothers were in their late 60s, old men who'd gotten rich off the ashes of a widow's dreams. They were inside the bakery, celebrating its 30th anniversary. Champagne and pastries, speeches about hard work and the American dream. Vincent had waited until tonight deliberately, wanted them comfortable, celebrating, thinking they'd gotten away with it. He walked into the bakery alone. The celebration stopped. Everyone recognized him. You didn't become a boss without people knowing your face. Carlo's smile froze. His brothers went pale. Vincent Romano, Carlo said, trying to sound friendly. This is unexpected. Can we offer you? Do you remember my mother? Vincent's voice was quiet. Everyone in the room heard it clearly. Carlo's face went blank. I don't know what you mean. Maria Romano, this was her bakery. 30 years ago tonight it burned down. She died trying to save her week's receipts because you'd undercut her prices until she was drowning in debt. That was an accident. The fire inspector was paid off, just like the cops were paid off, just like everyone was paid off. Vincent took a step closer. You offered to buy her out. She refused. 3 days later, 3 men were seen running from her building right before it burned. Want to guess who those 3 men were? The room was silent. Carlo's brothers were backing toward the rear exit. Vincent's men had already blocked it. I was 10 years old, Vincent continued, his voice still eerily calm. I watched her run back in to get that money, watched the roof collapse, watched the firefighters take their sweet time because an Italian widow didn't matter enough to hurry. Vincent, please, that was 30 years ago. We were young, we made mistakes. Mistakes? For the first time, emotion crept into Vincent's voice. You murdered my mother and built your empire on her grave. And you call that a mistake? Carlo was sweating now. What do you want? Money? We can pay you whatever you want. Vincent smiled. It was not a kind smile. I want you to understand something. For 30 years I've been patient, building power, waiting, because I learned something from watching my mother die, that anger without power is just noise, but anger with patience, that can move mountains. He turned and walked toward the door. You have 5 minutes to get out. After that, this building burns, just like my mother's bakery burned. You can't. Vincent stopped at the door. I can. I have 400 men outside who'll make sure no fire trucks get here in time, who'll make sure no cops come to investigate, who'll make sure you understand exactly what my mother felt 30 years ago. He looked back at the Moretti brothers. The difference is, she died in the fire trying to save her livelihood. You're going to live and watch yours burn. Because I want you to spend the rest of your lives knowing you lost everything, just like she did. Knowing there's nothing you can do about it. That's justice. Vincent walked out. His men were waiting. He checked his watch. 5 minutes, then burn it. Everything. The bakery, their other buildings, their warehouses. I want all of it ash by morning. The Morettis ran, fled out the back door like rats from a sinking ship. Vincent watched them go, watched them pile into cars and speed away. Then he watched as his men surrounded the building. At exactly midnight, 30 years to the hour after his mother died, Romano's bakery, formerly Moretti and Sons, burst into flames. It spread quickly. The accelerants Vincent's men had placed ensured that. The building was fully engulfed within minutes. The fire department was called, but roadblocks mysteriously appeared. Police cars got flat tires. By the time firefighters arrived, there was nothing to save. The fire spread to the Moretti's other properties that night. Their warehouse in Brooklyn, their restaurant in Queens, their bakery in the Bronx. 4 different fires, all starting within an hour of each other, all burning hot and fast and complete. By dawn, the Moretti empire was ash. 30 years of work destroyed in a single night. Insurance wouldn't cover it. Arson was obvious, and investigators had been paid to ask the right questions that would void the policies. The Moretti brothers were ruined, not dead, because Vincent wanted them to live with it, wanted them to spend the rest of their days knowing what they'd lost, knowing who'd taken it from them, knowing they were powerless to do anything about it. Carlo Moretti died 2 years later, a broken man living in a rented room in New Jersey. His brothers scattered, leaving New York to escape Vincent's shadow. The family name, once respected in Italian business circles, became synonymous with the price of crossed debts. Vincent Romano stood outside the smoking ruins of the bakery where his mother died and felt nothing, no satisfaction, no closure. Just the cold understanding that justice, real justice, didn't make you feel better. It just balanced the scales. He'd spent 30 years building to this moment, and now that it was here, all he could think about was his mother's face the last time he saw her alive, telling him to stay with Mrs. Chen, promising she'd be right back. She died for $200 that was already gone, died trying to save something that couldn't be saved, and Vincent had just burned millions of dollars to the ground in her name, and it didn't bring her back, didn't make him feel whole. Didn't heal anything, but it sent a message to everyone in New York's underworld, to every businessman who thought he could prey on the weak, to every person who'd ever watched injustice happen and done nothing. Some debts take 30 years to collect, but they always get collected. Vincent Romano continued running his family for another 20 years. He was never charged with the Moretti fires. No one would testify. No evidence could be found that stood up in court. He died in 1972 at the age of 66 in his sleep in his bed in suburban Connecticut. At his funeral, old men whispered the story of the widow's son who'd waited 3 decades for revenge. It became legend in certain circles, a reminder that patience and power were more dangerous than rage. But there was one detail the legend never included, something Vincent had done quietly, without telling anyone. In 1951, the year after the fires, Vincent had purchased the lot where his mother's original bakery stood. He'd torn down what remained of the burned buildings and built something new, not a bakery, not a business. A small park with benches and flowers and a marble memorial stone that read, Maria Romano, 1886 to 1920. She built with love. She died with courage. She is not forgotten. Vincent visited that park every August 3rd for the rest of his life, would sit on the bench and remember his mother's hands kneading dough, remember the smell of fresh bread, remember when the world was smaller and his biggest worry was learning to braid challah correctly. The park is still there today. Most people walking past don't know its history, don't know it's a monument to a widow who died for $200 that was already stolen, don't know it marks the spot where a 10-year-old boy's innocence burned away and something cold and patient was forged in its place. But sometimes, if you're there at the right time, you'll see old men in expensive suits stopping at the memorial stone, touching it briefly, paying respects to a woman they never knew, whose son taught them that justice isn't about law, it's about memory and patience and making sure debts are always paid, even if it takes 30 years. If this story of justice delayed but not denied moved you, watch another tale of how one moment can echo through decades. Support us so we can keep sharing these stories about the long memory of vengeance and honor. Your support means everything.